my talk is about living everyday wonder, roots and wings. And I think we have a slide for that. Yeah, we do, but it'll come up. And so, but perhaps the cherished memories of childhood, of a familial home that's filled with our parents' unconditional love and acceptance, adventures with our siblings, maybe that's what comes to mind. But all of our holiday preparations, they strive to recreate that warm, loving, welcoming feeling in our present day holiday celebrations. So we have the Thanksgiving feast with a turkey, or, for the vegetarian equivalent, I think somebody called it tofurkey or something. And it's surrounded with all the fixings. It epitomizes the happy celebration of a welcoming home, right? It also can trigger some things about why things aren't like that, that gap. And so it's both sides of this that we're going to be talking about today. So there's a book called When Main Street Meets the River by Hodding Carter. He's a journalist. And he said, there are only two lasting bequests that we can hope to give our children: roots and wings. These can be grown, these roots and wings, only in the home. So when we think of that ideal home, we often envision a place where we feel safe and free to be exactly who we are, right? No pretense. We don't have to play small. We goof up and or screw up broil, and we're still loved, right? And there's in that safe environment, we are free to discover who we are. That's a trial and error process, right? And so we have to learn what works and who we are. I thought this, my daughter always wanted to be a marine biologist until she discovered design. And then there was the, and she wanted to design clothes, and then she wanted to design houses. And then she decided that, there's no money in that. It's really too competitive. And I think I'm going to go do fundraising like my dad did. And it, so she's still changing, but it's a process of discovering that we go on, right? And when we go on there, few of us were fortunate to grow up in that home where there was exactly that perfect response we needed every time, this perfect ideal home. And we all long for it, though, to have some roots, to have a familiar place where we belong. On our hero's journey, whether it was our first time leaving home or a starting point to wherever we're going to go next in life, because that happens many times, we come back to home. It's a place of starting and going. We talked about that last week in the hero's journey and how that happens. And so we're like a fledgling bird that's leaving the nest. We have to learn to survive on our own once we leave that home. And in an ideal home, an unconditional love, a sense of belonging and appropriate boundaries provide a safe place. And so we don't have to leave until we're ready. Or maybe we get pushed out if we're not leaving soon enough, but to explore, but we get to explore the possibilities, right? And so some of our excursions into the external world of school or work, friendships, exciting new ideas, some of them are great successes and it's wonderful. And then some of them are not so successful, right? And so on one hand, we come home to celebrate with our family, and the other hand, we come back to commiserate, to say something, I love you unconditionally anyway. And even though we might be disappointed in ourselves, and the people at home might be disappointed too, but they still love us. They still help us to get on our feet and try again, right? And so in the ideal home, the parents and the family are there to support us in times of success and failure. They believe in us. They lovingly help us sort out who we are as an expression of that divine, infinite presence, right? That's who we are ultimately. Now, if we didn't have the gift of an ideal home, we can still create that loving home now and learn to cultivate our connection with the divine as our always present inner guide, our inner home, the place that we're always at home. Either way, once we're grounded in who we truly are, we are able to release the need to play small just to fit in, right? And this is what Brene Brown was talking about in the reading from this morning, is that we we learn to be our true selves and belong. We learn to connect with that spirit within as our true home. And this gives us a sense of being loved, by the infinite. How much better does it get than that? Of being safe, of accepting ourselves and everyone as that perfect creation and expression of the divine infinite love. Ernest Holmes, in the book A Reader on Practical Wisdom, said, "We are all rooted in the one life. Your endeavor then is not so much to find out God as it is to realize God's presence already there, and to understand that this presence is always with you in our heart of hearts," right? And so from our healthy roots, then, we are able to be ourselves, spread our wings, and fly, right? And it's that grounding that really helps us. And a lot of the stuff I'm taking today is from this book, Braving the Wilderness, The Quest for True Belonging and the Courage to Stand Alone by Brene Brown. And she says, belonging is the innate human desire to be part of something larger than us. Because this yearning is so primal, we often try to acquire it by fitting in and by seeking approval, which are not only hollow substitutes for belonging, but are often barriers to it. Because true belonging only happens when we present our authentic, imperfect selves to the world, our sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance, right? That's really important. In its ideal, home is the place where we can be our authentic, imperfect selves and know we can be seen, loved, and accepted just the way we are. And I think several of us have gone through that this morning. But that's why we have this wonderful spiritual home, right? It's a place that we know where we feel known. Home at its best gives us this sense of rootedness, a feeling of familiarity, safe and belonging. And this stability established by that safety and belonging creates a launching pad, if you will, that will allow us to spread our wings and fly. We feel free to venture out, to try something that we might not be perfect at because we're doing it for the first time, and to be our authentic selves, right? Knowing home is always a safe place to land. We've got a place to come back to, right? True belonging, though, is when we learn to take our home with us, to be ourselves at the same time that we are out in the world. We take, it's that portable home that we pack up. They used to have church in a box, so we've got our true belonging home in the box. And it happens when we're clear on who we are as ourselves and, most importantly, as a part of the one, right? Brene Brown says, true belonging is the spiritual practice of believing in and belonging to yourself so deeply that you can share your most authentic self with the world and find sacredness in both being a part of something and standing alone in the wilderness. True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. Now, this week, I have to say that I was very distracted with the election. And I was always checking and rechecking what the latest update was. And me with my numbers and stuff, I knew exactly what I was like a Steve Karnacki in person. And so, but I woke up early Monday and Tuesday, and I just knew that something good was going to happen. I mean, I've been waiting, and I made my donations, and I just knew it was going to be good. I've had this hope against hope, but I just felt some deep joy of something was going to be coming to the surface. Like it was almost like prayers from a primal scream level were being answered, right? And it just that faith of seeing that truth, spiritual truth underneath it all. And there was this deep inner peace, right? That things would unfold perfectly for that rule of law underneath all to return to the surface for one nation under God, the one God of all beings to appear again. Right? And what happened? So Ernest Holmes in Questions and Answers on the Science of Mind, he says, the kingdom of heaven is that place within ourselves where there is universal and individual peace at all times, peace that holds no doubt of our abiding good and wise divine protection. And when we had that election this week, there was a lot of fears that there would be violent erupting and that the whole thing would just go under, right? And we'd all go under with it. But Americans voted to support democracy and freedom over separation, violent words, and violent action, right? We came back to ourselves, to who we are, to that divine idea of who we are as a country. And we want to follow the rules. We might disagree on the policies, but we agree on the foundation of a democracy, of a government that's for the people and by the people. Brene Brown, in her book, Braving the Wilderness, she said, belonging to ourselves, as described today, means being called to stand alone, to brave the wilderness of uncertainty and vulnerability and criticism. And with the world feeling like a political and ideological combat zone, this is remarkably tough. The politics, the gun violence, autocrats, refugees fleeing war, violence, and famine, the climate change that increases the frequency and intensity of severe weather events, it all is, a lot of chaos seemingly going on, and then also even when, but Brene Brown says, we seem to have forgotten that even when we're connected to one another by something greater than group membership, politics, and ideology, that we're reconnected by love and the human spirit. No matter how separated we are by what we think and believe, we are part of the same spiritual story. So part of this means that when we disagree with someone, particularly someone that we love dearly, there is a place within oneness of unity for us to each be ourselves. There's a reason that we are each here. And by having a conversation and remembering that we come from the one, we can stand on the same side and look out and find that, there's something that we didn't see. And then this is how we could come together. Or maybe it's that, your goal is to serve in this area and mine is to serve over here. And we need each other to have a complete community. Right? We each have our own path. I think the skills of being a surgeon are very different than the skills to be a good artist and very different than the skills to be a good childcare person or a mother or even to be an 8-year-old boy. I mean, we're all different and at different times in our life, we're all different. And so learning to be who ourselves and not being apologetic about it, but also be willing to have that growing edge. When there's friction, that's part of it. There's this great book called the Missing Piece, and there's it's one of the Saul Silverman books, I think. Saul Silverman, yeah. And so this piece goes out and it's just all this roughness, and there's somebody missing, and so they run into all of this conflict. And then there's this edge gets rubbed off, all these rough edges, and it's just rolling, and it doesn't roll very well in the beginning. And so, but it keeps rolling and it hurts and it's rolling and then it finds that it's round eventually. All those rough edges have been ground off by the process and they find wholeness within themselves, right? And that's part of it. So this process that we fight so much, sometimes it is what we need to turn a rough stone into a diamond, right? I grew up in Lutherville, Maryland until the 8th grade when we moved to Colorado. And Lutherville is a little town in Maryland. It's just a little over 50 miles from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, right? Now, the Battle of Gettysburg in the Civil War was fought on July 1st through 3rd, 3 days in 1863, just days before our nation's 87th birthday. And it was considered by many to be the turning point in the war. Right? Of the 50,000 casualties that day, during those 3 days, between the Union and the Confederate troops, about 8,000 were dead, about 11,000 were missing or lost in action, and the rest were wounded, which was a much more severe thing in 1863 than it is now, right? removal of the dead soldiers from this field. And I've been to this battlefield, and it looks like it's about the size of a big football field in the middle, surrounded by these beautiful old houses. That was the field. And they came in from different places. It was a little town where big soldiers and battles were coming in on all different sides. And they still find buttons and things like that in the middle of the field. But the removal of the dead soldiers from that field did not begin until October 17th, months later, 10 months later. And not all the dead had been buried when President Lincoln gave his speech on November 19th, which is the anniversary is coming up. The first speaker was a well-received 2-hour oration by Edward Everett, a Unitarian pastor. I guess ministers tend to be long-winded, and who served as a congressman and senator from Massachusetts. But they appreciated it back then. There wasn't TV. And Abraham Lincoln was not feeling well that day, but he rose to the occasion because it was important to honor the cemetery and the people that had died. And so he gave his Gettysburg address. It only has 271 words. It's one of the shortest and yet most remembered speeches in our nation's history. And it's especially for those of us that live so close to Gettysburg and got to visit there so many times. When I was in the 6th grade, our school choir sang a musical version from memory. And so it's deeply ingrained in my memory and my heart, right? So I'd like to share it with you this morning, not the singing version, but the speech. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men and women are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on the great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor powers to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work, which they who fought here have thus so far nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. And we did that this week, right? We stood up for what we believe in. So, what does home mean to you in that ideal sense? Is your home in your life a place where you feel safe and fully expressed? Yes? Why? Be grateful for what you have. If not, what can you do to create more emotional or physical safety for yourself and others, for your loved ones? Things come up during the holidays. There's a full moon, lunar eclipse, the election, all these things brought things up, and I was no exception. For me, I'm going to be traveling south for Thanksgiving with my husband to see some of our 8 children and grandchildren that we haven't seen for 2 or 3 years, some of them. And some reunions will be easy and joyful, and others will be difficult and require reconciliation, if that's even possible. But that's what's important. That is what it feels like to be in integrity, to be me, to live by my values, to rely on those roots and wings that I grew up with, that I have grown over a lifetime of in a family that was loving, and in this teaching, where we stand for loving all people, including all people, loving all people just as they are. And even when things are good and even when things are stressful, we are in it together, right? We have to trust that spirit is in the room. There is no separation in reality, only in our perception. And so I'm going to show up and I'm going to give spirit a chance, and we'll see what happens, right? Let's take this to prayer. And so, knowing that there is only one, that there is no separation, that each and every one of us is a part of this one, the infinite invisible, the infinite love, the infinite peace, that is the truth of the universe and of me and of each person here and of each person in my family and in this country and in the world. We are all one. We come from that same source. There is no conflict. There's not a part of our growing out. There is only this unity within the diversity. And so as we allow ourselves to recognize this, to remember it, as we go within our being, we learn to live from the inside out and observe, be witnesses to what is going on, and not react, but respond with love and understanding and compassion, and know that we are here to love and support each other, to lift each other up, to live as one. That every act is either an act of love or a call for love. And so we learn to open our arms and welcome. We open our minds to growing. We open our minds to see a greater picture and go beyond our little experience to see with that infinite love and understanding. We open our hearts to each other, to a greater yet to be in our own lives, in our families, in our spiritual community, in our nation, in the world, indeed in the universe. This is the truth of who we are. We are infinite love in form, expressing itself as us in every way. And so we let go and let God be this truth. It is with great gratitude that we feel the joy of being alive. It is with gratitude that we celebrate Thanksgiving for all the good that is in our lives, for all the barriers that have been removed so we can see that good and experience it and know that we are full to overflowing with love and prosperity, wisdom and peace, and we share it. And as we do, the world is healed, it is whole, it is perfect and complete, just as it is right here and right now. We bless everyone in every way, and it is good. And so we let it be.